The rain had come early that year, slicking the earth with mud and washing the horizon in shades of gray. Wind swept the prairie, bending the long grass until it flattened like supplicant hands. Amid it all stood Caroline Hale, her boots half sunken in the earth, her dress torn at the hem, streaked with blood and water. Her chest heaved as she stared at the wagon disappearing into the trees, each creaking wheel another note in a funeral dirge she could never unhear. Inside that wagon were her daughters. She did not cry. Not yet. Not while Ezekiel was still watching. Her husband stood beside her, his arms crossed, a flask dangling from his fingers. The silver gleamed even in the stormlight. His face was untouched by the chaos, expression blank, detached, almost smug. "You sold them," she said, her voice raw, thick with disbelief. "You sold them, Ezekiel." "They weren't boys," he said flatly, as if the words were scripture. "They weren't mine to keep." The air collapsed in her lungs. For a moment she was sure the world had stopped spinning. "They were our children." Her voice rose, cracked. "Rose is 11. Ella is 9. They're babies. Their mouths," Ezekiel snapped. "Mouths that eat, scream, bleed, weak, always weak. I needed sons, real heirs. A man leaves a name behind, not broken dolls." Caroline charged him. She didn't think, didn't weigh consequence. She slammed her fists into his chest, clawed at his face, howled like something untamed. The flask fell. He caught her wrists in one brutal grip and twisted. Her knees gave. He shoved her backward into the mud, her back striking a stone beneath the surface. Pain shot through her ribs like lightning. Her breath fled. He leaned over her, close enough that she could smell the sour whiskey and tobacco in his breath. "You'll stay here," he said. "The land needs tending, the animals need feeding, you'll bear better next time." He spat beside her face, then turned and walked away without looking back. The wagon disappeared completely, swallowed by the forest. Her girls were gone. The rain soaked through her bones before she moved again. It was not grief that stirred her, nor instinct. It was fury, a cold, sharpened fury that steadied her limbs and cleared the tears from her eyes. Her daughters were not lost, not to her, not yet. She forced herself upright, every muscle in her body screaming. She limped to the barn, wrapped her arms in a threadbare blanket, and sat among the hay until her pulse quieted. Thunder cracked the sky open above her. In the shadows, mice scurried. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Caroline waited until Ezekiel had gone out the next morning. He never looked at her the same after a beating, more annoyance than guilt. He left early to hunt or drink or disappear, and she used those hours wisely. She entered the house with a calm she did not feel, collected what she could. Dried apples, cornbread, a knife meant for gutting trout. She wrapped it all in a flour sack. The locket came last, nestled beneath the bed. Inside it, the girls' faces smiled out at her, Rose with her serious eyes and careful hands. Ella, forever dirty-kneed, forever laughing. Caroline pressed her lips to the image. "I'm coming," she whispered. She left on foot. No horse, no wagon, no map. Only the direction she'd seen them taken, and the sliver of sunlight slicing between tree trunks where the forest swallowed the road. Each step away from the farm was a step away from the woman she had once been. A farmer's wife. A Sunday singer. A mother who'd thought love alone could shield her children from the world's cruelty. That woman was gone now, buried beneath the bruises and the blood. What remained was sharper, harder, forged in betrayal. By dusk, the soles of her boots had split. She walked on blistered feet, ignoring the sting. She slept beneath a tree, shivering beneath the blanket, her fingers curled around the knife. Dreams came fitfully, her girls' voices echoing through endless corridors, always too far, always just out of reach. On the second day, she found the old trapper's post along the ridge. It was abandoned, but a single deer pelt still hung from the rafters, half rotted. She took it anyway, slicing off the usable parts and binding them to her shoulders for warmth. Her hands no longer trembled as they had the day before. She was learning. A trail of hoofprints led west, wagon tracks, deeper than most, heavy. She followed them. Sometimes she ran, stumbling through bramble and root, mouth dry, lungs burning. Other times she crept, hiding from riders on the road or from shadows that moved just a little too deliberately among the trees. She saw them 3 days later, just a flash, when cresting a low hill. A wagon pulled by 2 bay horses, covered, with canvas sagging slightly in the rain. The man driving it was large, with a red beard and a whip coiled at his hip. Caroline saw a hand lift the canvas flap from inside. Small, delicate. She saw Rose's face. Her knees buckled. But, by the time she'd scrambled down the slope, the wagon was already gone, the sound of hooves fading into the east. She screamed, not out of despair, but to fuel her legs, to push forward. She knew now. They were alive. That night she caught a rabbit in a snare, skinned it with shaking fingers, cooked it over a fire that smoked more than it burned. The meat was tough, nearly inedible, but she ate every scrap. Her daughters would, need her strong. She would not fail them again. The next morning the weather turned colder. Snowflakes drifted through the trees. Winter was coming early, the way it did when the earth was angry. She trudged on, boots now tied together with twine she'd fashioned from her dress's torn hem. Her toes had gone numb. She passed a dying tree where buzzards circled. A man hung there, strung from a low branch, a sign nailed to his chest. Thief. Caroline stared at him for a long time, then took the boots from his feet. They were too big, but they kept the frost out. On the 5th night, she found a stream swollen with melt. She cupped the water in her hands, drank until her stomach turned. Her reflection stared back. Hollow cheeks, cracked lips, eyes alight, with something feral. Ezekiel had said she wasn't strong enough to raise sons. She had believed that once. But now she saw it differently. Sons may inherit land or names, but daughters inherited the fire. And mothers carried the torch. She whispered her daughters' names with every step. Rose, Ella, Rose, Ella. Their names became rhythm. Their memory, armor. She nearly died on the 7th day. A cougar, lean and desperate, leapt from the ridge above. Teeth bared, claws glinting, she rolled just in time. The knife found its throat more out of instinct than aim. The animal thrashed once, then stilled. Caroline lay beneath its weight, breathless, heart pounding like war drums. Afterward, she skinned it and kept the pelt. The world didn't slow for grief, it didn't wait for healing. So she moved on. A week turned to 10 days, then 2 weeks. The forest thinned. Settler tracks appeared more frequently. Smoke rose in the distance. Civilization. Or danger. Or both. She asked questions carefully in roadside inns. A woman traveling alone was always suspicion, so she lied. Spoke in hushed tones. Offered what little coin she'd hidden in her braid. She heard of a red-bearded man traveling with 2 girls, heading toward the mining towns west of the Black Hills. She traded her last piece of silver, a brooch her mother gave her, to an old trader for directions. Her body ached in ways she couldn't name. Her shoulders bore the weight of the pelt, the knife, the sack. Her soul bore the rest. Caroline finally stopped one night atop a hill overlooking a valley flooded in moonlight. She knelt, knees in frost-bitten grass, and removed the locket. "I'm still coming," she whispered. "I will find you." She tucked it back under her shirt, where it lay against her heart, pulsing like a second beat. Behind her, the wind changed, cold, whispering of storms to come. But she would not turn back. She would burn the world down if she had to. And somewhere far ahead, her daughters waited. This was only the beginning. The wind tore across the plains with a violence that stripped the skin of warmth and whispered of death in its icy breath. Caroline wrapped the cougar pelt tighter around her shoulders, each step crunching over frost-bitten grass and brittle twigs. Her muscles screamed. Her boots, too large and stiff, had rubbed raw wounds across her heels. but she moved forward with the relentless focus of a predator who could smell its quarry ahead. Every breath she drew now tasted of smoke and pine, sharper in the mornings, heavier by dusk. The road had dissolved into muddy cart tracks, ruts carving the land like scars. She didn't know how many days had passed since the last settlement. Time was measured now only in hunger pangs, bruised feet, and the muttered prayers she whispered with each mile. Let me be faster. Let them still be there. She hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. The last rabbit had been lean, bitter, barely meat. Berries had grown scarcer as the cold crept in, and even the birds had gone quiet. She thought briefly about doubling back, waiting out the weather. But then she remembered Rose's thin arms clutching the canvas flap, that fleeting moment of eye contact before the wagon vanished, and she kept moving. Late in the evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and bleeding reds, Caroline stumbled upon a half-dead fire nestled under a rock outcrop. It smoked weakly, embers glowing like tired eyes. A small bundle of sticks sat beside it, freshly gathered. She froze. Someone was near. Her fingers closed around the hilt of the knife at her belt. Her body crouched low, breath stilled. Eyes scanned the shadows. Then she saw him, sitting cross-legged just beyond the fire, motionless, silent. He was nearly invisible, his body cloaked in thick animal hide, a long braid, trailing over one shoulder, a face carved from stone and shadow. His gaze met hers with no surprise, no aggression, just watchfulness. He said nothing. Neither did she. He offered her a piece of dried meat without breaking eye contact. She didn't move. Then slowly he set it beside the fire and turned away, his attention returning to the flames. Caroline inched forward, still clutching the knife, ready to bolt. But her body was at its limit. The cold had reached her bones, and the ache in her stomach felt like glass scraping her insides. She took the meat, ate it in silence, savoring the salted fat like it was gold. When she finished, she said, "Thank you." The man gave no answer. Later that night, she woke to find a blanket draped over her and the fire stoked higher. The man sat a few feet away, whittling wood with a bone-handled knife. Moonlight touched the edges of his face. High cheekbones, eyes like flint, she whispered. "Who are you?" Still, no reply. He looked at her, then pointed to the eastern ridge. "Trader camp," he said, voice rough, clipped. 3 days. Caroline nodded, heart quickening. "Children?" He paused, nodded once. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from proximity to hope. She rose the next morning before the sun had broken the horizon, expecting the man to be gone. But he was already waiting at the base of the hill, bough slung across his back, small satchel over one shoulder. Without speaking, he began walking. She followed. They traveled in silence for most of that first day. The terrain changed. Trees thickened into dense woodland. The trail narrowed, the forest pressing in on either side like a trap. Every snap of a branch sent Caroline's heart hammering against her ribs. But the man, silent and sure, moved, like smoke, never looking down, never hesitating. She watched how he listened to the wind, how his fingers brushed tree bark, how he paused at every bird call. He didn't need to speak. The land told him everything. That evening, she offered him half of her last biscuit. He took it with a nod. No thanks, no words. She said, "My name is Caroline." He hesitated, then said simply, "Tawoti, is that Cherokee?" He didn't respond. The silence between them was not cold. It was intentional, as if neither wanted to crowd the space with needless sound. Still, something in her softened. She had spent weeks being invisible, either ignored, dismissed, or hunted. But this man, this stranger, saw her and let her be. That night, they killed a fox together. She flushed it from the underbrush with a shout, and Tawoti dropped it with a single arrow. She skinned it herself while he repaired the fletching on his bow. Her fingers bled, but she didn't flinch. He watched her quietly. When she offered him the liver, raw, warm, he accepted. As they sat by the fire, she dared to ask, "Why are you helping me?" Tawoti poked the flames with a stick. Thinking, "Storm coming," he said. "You would have died alone." Caroline said nothing, but she didn't look away. In the morning the snow came, not a flurry, a deluge. White swallowed the trail, erased tracks, silenced the world. The cold bit through her bones. She faltered after just an hour, collapsing against a tree. Her body rebelled, numb and useless. Tawoti didn't speak. He hoisted her up and carried her across his back for 3 hours. She didn't cry. She couldn't. He built a shelter that night from pine branches and bark, a lean-to angled against a hill. Inside, the fire flickered soft shadows onto the walls. He placed her near it and handed her a pouch of boiled roots. The warmth returned, slowly. She murmured, "You don't know me. Why risk yourself?" Tawoti finally looked at her. "I know loss," he said. That was all. 3 days passed. They reached a clearing where smoke curled from a distant ridge. Below it, tents, wagons, horses, men with rifles. Caroline's heart began to pound again. Tawoti pointed. "Camp, traders, same man, red beard." She grabbed his arm. "Are the girls still there?" He shook his head slowly. "One. Older. One." Caroline's breath caught. "Rose," she whispered. Tawoti didn't answer, but his hand gripped her shoulder once, steadying her. They made camp just beyond the trader's line of sight. Caroline watched through a crack in the rock where they hid. She saw the man, broad as ever, laughing beside the fire, red beard stained with wine. Near him, chained to a post like an animal, Rose. Her daughter was thinner now. Dirt smudged her cheeks. Her eyes stared through people like they weren't real. Caroline had seen that look before, in soldiers after battle. The fury came back. Not hot this time, but cold. Sharp. Tawoti handed her the knife. "You go in dark, I go loud. Draw them away." Caroline stared at him. "Why?" He tilted his head. "Because she's watching. She saw you. Don't make her wait." Caroline's throat tightened. They moved as planned. Tawoti circled, lit dry brush on fire near the edge of camp. The flames leapt quickly, crackling up into the trees. Traders screamed, men ran to stop it, and in the confusion Caroline moved like shadow. She reached Rose within seconds. Her hands trembled as she undid the chain. Rose blinked up at her. "Mama?" Caroline cupped her face. "Yes, it's me, it's really me." Rose didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just held on. They slipped into the woods as shouting filled the camp. A shot rang out. Then another. Tawoti came minutes later, blood trailing down his side. Caroline tore strips from her shirt, pressed them against the wound. He winced but didn't move. She worked quickly, hands steady. "Thank you," she said. He didn't answer. Rose didn't speak much that night. She stared at the fire, fingers curled into Caroline's like she was afraid they'd disappear. Caroline fed her slowly, one bite at a time, washed her face, hummed a lullaby. She asked, "Where's Ella?" Rose didn't look up. "Sold her. Again," she whispered. "Richer man. East." Caroline closed her eyes. The pain was sharper now, because it meant Ella was still out there, still waiting. Tawoti stirred at the fire's edge, watching them. Caroline looked at him. "I'm going after her." He nodded once, solemn. Then he said, "We go east." In the distance, thunder rolled again. The fire cracked. Rose curled against her mother's chest. And Caroline, though exhausted and wounded, stared into the darkness, with a new resolve. One daughter saved, one still lost. She was not done yet. The air felt different in the eastern hills. Drier. more oppressive. The scent of pine and wet earth was replaced by the acrid tang of burning coal and dust, and the further they moved toward the mining settlements, the heavier the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the land that had changed. It was the people. Caroline could feel it in the way the men looked at her, eyes too quick to judge, faces too worn from hard lives. The roads were wide here, well worn by wagon wheels, but they were also more dangerous. The law of the land didn't stretch far enough to touch the criminal underworld that had settled like rot among the miners and traders. It had been 4 days since Tawodi had led them east. Rose had not spoken much, just the occasional whisper of "I'm tired" or "my legs hurt." Caroline's heart squeezed with each word. She could see the girl's bones beneath her skin, fragile like old paper, her once bright eyes dimmed by fear and neglect. It was a cruelty Caroline had known all too well, but seeing it on her daughter's face, it felt like a wound carved deep into her soul. Every night they camped in the shelter of the trees, and every morning, Rose had trouble finding the strength to rise. But she rose every time. They walked, they traveled, they hunted together. Tawodi's silence had become a comforting presence. His stoic gaze and steady hands, his precise actions, all spoke to a depth of experience that Caroline had only begun to understand. She never asked him about his past. He didn't offer it, and she didn't press. But when the firelight caught the line of his jaw or the quiet way he moved through the world, Caroline could feel the weight of a history that mirrored her own, of loss, survival, and an unspoken need for justice. It was something that didn't require words. They entered the outskirts of a mining town on the morning of the 6th day, a small place called Silver Creek. The town was perched at the base of a rocky ridge, framed by the sprawl of raw earth, where the miners had gouged their livelihoods from the soil. The ground was littered with the remains of abandoned shafts and rusted tools. A creek black with runoff ran through the middle of the town, feeding into the half-dried wells and turning everything around it a sickly brown. The town stank of sweat, steel, and the sharp tang of desperation. Caroline could feel the heaviness of it as soon as they entered, like a noose around her neck. She could hear the hum of the place, too. Voices raised in shouting matches, the clinking of pickaxes and shovels, and the high-pitched ringing of a distant bell. Silver Creek was not a town that welcomed outsiders. It wasn't a place to find solace or safety. It was a town built on the backs of men who had nothing left to lose. Tawodi kept his distance from the buildings, his posture alert, his eyes scanning for trouble. He'd said little since they entered the town, only speaking when necessary, when the land itself demanded action. Caroline, for her part, kept her face hidden beneath the shadow of her hood, hoping to avoid the notice of the miners who were too busy drinking and gambling to pay attention to strangers. They walked past the edge of town and into the narrow streets, the dirt underfoot giving way to the sound of clinking coins and the sharp calls of a man selling whiskey from a cart. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight of violence about to explode. They found the trading post at the far end of town, its doors propped open, a bell tinkling in the wind as they entered. The inside was dim, lit only by the fading daylight, seeping through the cracks in the walls. Rows of goods lined the shelves: food, tools, rough-made clothing, and the odd assortment of jewelry or shiny objects that were meant to tempt the miners. At the far corner near the fire pit, a group of rough men sat drinking, speaking in low voices. The shopkeeper, a portly man with a red face, glanced up as they entered but said nothing. "Looking for a man," Caroline said, her voice low but firm. "Red beard, large, trades in children?" The shopkeeper's face paled slightly. He looked away quickly, his eyes darting toward the men in the corner. "You won't find him here," he muttered, his voice tight. "Not a man you want to find." Tawodi stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the shopkeeper. "Tell us where he is." The shopkeeper wiped his hands nervously on his apron. He's not a good man. You'll be in danger." "He has my daughter," Caroline interrupted, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened at the thought. "Where is he?" The shopkeeper hesitated, his eyes flicking to the men in the corner, then back to Caroline. "He's in the mines. he said finally, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Takes what he wants, sells it to the miners. He's made deals with some of the worst men around. Caroline's blood ran cold. She could feel the dark cloud of dread that settled over the room. She was so close now, so close. Where? She demanded. The shopkeeper swallowed hard, then gestured toward the far end of the town. Down the old shaft. They keep the girls there. You'll never get past the guards. I don't need to, Caroline said, her voice barely more than a growl. I'll get my daughter. She turned without waiting for a response, her heart pounding with both fear and fury. Tawodi followed close behind, his silent presence a shield. He didn't need to ask what Caroline intended. He understood. They didn't speak as they moved toward the mines, the town growing more oppressive with each step. The clamor of miners grew louder, the sound of heavy machinery grinding against rock echoing through the valley. The earth seemed alive with the noise of destruction, as though the land itself was rebelling against the men who sought to tear it apart. At the mine's entrance, 2 guards stood, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Their eyes narrowed as Caroline and Tawodi approached, and for a brief moment, Caroline's heart leaped into her throat. The guards were bigger than she'd imagined. They wore the look of men who had seen everything and cared for nothing. She forced her hand to steady, her fingers wrapped tight around the hilt of her knife. Tawodi moved first, stepping forward with a calmness that betrayed the sharpness of his intentions. He exchanged a few words in a low voice, his tone steady but firm. Caroline stayed back, watching. The words came out too soft for her to understand, but the guards' reactions spoke volumes. They stiffened, then nodded. One of them turned and led them deeper into the mine. Caroline's breath was shallow. Rose was close now. So close. The mine shaft was darker than she expected, the air thick with dust and the acrid scent of sulfur. As they walked deeper, the light from the entrance grew fainter until they were swallowed by shadows. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, amplifying the silence that stretched between them. Then Caroline saw them. The girls, dozens of them, huddled together in the far corner of the shaft, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. It was like a nightmare made flesh. Their fragile bodies were bound by rough rope, their wrists raw and bleeding from the shackles that kept them in place. And there, sitting in the center of them all, was the man she had been hunting. The red beard, the cruel eyes, the smirk that never seemed to leave his face. He didn't look surprised when he saw her, only amused. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. Well, well, he said, his voice oozing with mock affection. I was wondering when you'd come for her. Caroline's hand tightened on the knife, but Tawodi moved first, his arrow aimed directly at the man's chest. The red-bearded traitor froze. The girls gasped. Let her go, Caroline said, her voice low but deadly. Now, the man smiled. You don't know what you're asking for, he said. But there was something in his eyes, something that shifted just a fraction. Maybe fear, maybe recognition. You think you can just walk in here and take her? I'm not asking, Caroline replied. I'm taking her. The air between them thickened. The silence felt like a ticking clock, each second bringing them closer to the inevitable. Tawodi's fingers shifted, the tension in the bowstring palpable. And then the fight began. The air was thick with tension, the stillness just before a storm. Caroline's heart beat like a war drum in her chest, a rhythm that drowned out all other sounds. Her fingers gripped the handle of the knife, the blade cold against her palm. Her breath was shallow, controlled. If she allowed herself to take in the full weight of what was about to happen, she knew she would freeze. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was for her daughters. All that had been stolen would be returned, or she would die trying. The man with the red beard took a slow step toward her, eyes glinting with both malice and something else, something that flickered beneath the surface, a recognition of the fight he knew was coming. Caroline saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance of a man who had been untouchable for too long. He had grown fat on the misery of others, convinced that no one would dare challenge him. "You think you can just waltz in here, kill my men, and walk out with her?" He sneered, his voice grating. "This place is mine. These girls too. I'll sell them wherever I damn well please." The words hit Caroline like a slap. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Tawodi's bow was still trained on him, unyielding, but the red-bearded man wasn't looking at the arrow. He was looking at Caroline, sizing her up as if she were nothing but a piece of meat. "We'll see about that," Caroline said, her voice low, steady. She didn't wait for him to make the next move. In a flash, she lunged forward, knife outstretched, aiming for the man's throat. He was fast, too fast for someone of his size, and he sidestepped with a grunt, pulling a revolver from the holster at his side. The sound of the hammer clicking back echoed through the mine, sharp as a gunshot. Caroline's body instinctively ducked, the bullet whizzing past her ear so close she could feel the heat from the blast. She didn't hesitate. She was already moving again, the knife in her hand slashing through the air with a precision she didn't even know she possessed. She felt the force of the blade as it met resistance, the man's arm jerking back with a sharp cry of pain. The revolver slipped from his grasp, clattering against the stone floor. But before Caroline could press her advantage, the man staggered backward, his hand clutching the wound on his forearm. He grinned, a cold, humorless smile that stretched across his face like a mask. "You think that's enough to stop me?" He sneered, his voice rising in anger. Behind him, two of his men had drawn knives of their own, moving to flank her. Caroline's eyes darted between them, her instincts flaring. She was cornered, but she wasn't afraid. She had been fighting for her life for too long to be afraid now. Tawodi's voice rang out calm, cutting through the chaos. "I'll handle them," he said, his tone steady as a rock. Before Caroline could react, Tawodi's arrow was already in flight. The man closest to Caroline collapsed with a guttural scream as the arrow found its mark in his chest, dropping him to the ground like a rag doll. The second man hesitated, fear flashing across his face. Tawodi's eyes locked onto him, unwavering. The man took one step back, then another, and with a wild glance at his fallen comrade, he turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the mine. Caroline didn't spare him a second thought. She was focused on the man with the red beard, who was now backing away, his face contorted in rage. The wound on his arm was bleeding heavily, but his eyes remained sharp with malice. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice venomous. "You think you can take everything from me?" Caroline pressed forward, her knife held in front of her like an extension of herself. "I'm taking what's mine," she said, her voice a low promise. The man's grin faltered. "You're a fool, woman. There's no winning here." His hand reached behind him, pulling out a second revolver, his fingers slick with blood. "This ends now." In that split second, Caroline moved. She saw his arm begin to raise, saw the flash of steel in his hand as he aimed the gun. She closed the distance between them faster than he expected, and she drove the knife into his side, her body pressing against his in the momentum of the strike. The revolver went off, the shot ringing out deafeningly, but it missed, the bullet embedding into the stone wall behind them. The red-bearded man let out a choked cry of pain, but he didn't fall. He pushed against her, trying to break free, but Caroline held on, twisting the knife deeper, feeling his body convulse as his blood spilled out in hot streams. "Let go," he snarled, slapping at her arm, trying to dislodge her. But Caroline's grip was like iron, her determination sharper than the blade in her hand. She wasn't going to let him take another breath. With a final, desperate grunt, the man tried to shove her off, but his strength was fading fast. His knees buckled beneath him, and he fell to the ground, his hands slipping away from the knife as the life drained from his body. Caroline stood over him, breath heavy, chest rising and falling as she wiped the blood from her blade. For a moment, the mine was silent. The only sounds were the distant drip of water, the hum of the earth beneath. Their feet. The girls huddled together, their faces wide with fear, their eyes fixed on Caroline as if unsure whether she was their savior or their executioner. Caroline turned away from the body, her gaze locking with Rose's. She saw the same hollow look in her daughter's eyes, the same numbness that had come over her when Caroline had first seen her at the camp. But something else too, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of hope. Caroline walked toward them, her voice soft. "We're leaving. Now." Rose didn't hesitate this time. She stood, her legs shaky, but she moved. Caroline reached out for her, pulling her into an embrace. The warmth of her body a stark contrast to the chill that still clung to Caroline's skin. Tawodi was already moving, his bow slung across his back as he checked the surroundings, making sure they weren't followed. He glanced at Caroline, then nodded. "We go." They didn't waste any more time. They moved quickly through the dark tunnels, the girls close behind them. Caroline's mind raced as she led them out of the mine and toward the distant hills. The weight of what had just happened settled over her like a thick blanket, suffocating but necessary. She had done it. She had rescued one of her daughters, but she hadn't saved them all. Not yet. They reached the edge of the mine, the faint light of dawn breaking through the trees. The world beyond seemed so much quieter now, so much clearer. Caroline's muscles ached from the fight, but she kept moving. There was no stopping now. As they made their way into the forest, the sound of distant voices reached them, shouting, panicked. They had to move fast before the traders realized what had happened. Caroline looked at Tawodi, and in that glance she saw the unspoken promise. They would keep moving forward. They would get through this. And no matter what it took, Caroline would find her other daughter. She would bring Ella back. The thought steadied her heart. They weren't finished. Not yet. With the rising sun in their eyes and the horizon stretching out ahead, Caroline held her daughters close, a fire of determination burning in her chest. This was just the beginning. The end would come on her terms, and she would fight for it.